Why don't we go ahead and get started? Hafaday, buenas. My name is Neil Weir, co-director of Right to Democracy, uh, a nonprofit organization I founded with Addie Martinez Roman in 2023 that's working to build a movement to advance democracy, equity, and self-determination in U.S. territories. We have translated services here today. So for those who prefer to listen in Spanish, we have in the chat instructions for you to do so. As we go through this conversation about Greenland and U.S. territories, we'll have some guiding questions that we'll be asking of the panelists, but we encourage everyone, all the panelists, to engage and make this really more of a free-flowing conversation. We also welcome questions from the audience. You can put those questions in the question function or in the chat. We'll try to get to relevant ones during the presentation, and we'll also have a Q&A at the end. As people participate in the chat and ask questions, we encourage people to embrace Right to Democracy's values of building common ground while respecting differences. So we ask that people be respectful of each other and make sure that everyone has a space to be part of the conversation. And we'd love for you to learn more about our work on social media. We're at Right to Democracy, Right2 Democracy on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram. You can also check out our website, right2democracy.us, RIGHTTO democracy.us. And we'd encourage folks to consider getting involved. We have a wonderful cross-territorial coalition that includes many of the people on the panel today. If you're interested in learning more, you can email us at info@righttodemocracy.us. So just to get us started, wanted to do a round, ask the panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves. We have some really amazing panelists here today joining us from all 5 U.S. territories. If you can share your name, any organizational affiliations that are relevant, a brief background on your work in U.S. territories, and then just kind of a fun question, what's one impactful thing you've learned or would like to learn from another U.S. territory? Hadia, do you want to go ahead and kick it off?
Happy Talofa, buenas. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm Dr. Hadia Soar. I am the Environment and Democracy Cross-Territorial Fellow here at Right to Democracy. I'm also the president and co-founder of St. Janko, the St. John Heritage Collective, a founding member of the Virgin Islands Studies Collective. And as it pertains to questions of decolonization, I always say growing up on an island that's occupied by the national park, a federal entity, really pushed me to think through coloniality from young. So I did a PhD in Africana Studies. I was a research fellow in the African and African American Studies program at Stanford and a visiting scholar at the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice at Brown. And my writing and my thinking has often about American colonialism, decolonization, political status, and environmental justice. And so I'll actually say I learned a great deal from the people of Puerto Rico and the people of Guahan specifically about how to explicitly talk about political status and to normalize conversations about political status and American colonialism with a great deal of like empathy, care, but also high energy and attention to what people want and need in our communities.
Thanks so much. Keeping it in the Caribbean, Ava, do you want to go ahead? You're on mute.
Yeah,
oh, there you go.
Sure. Hi, my name is Eva Prados from Puerto Rico. I would love it if I continue speaking in Spanish. That is easier for me. Y Puerto Rico ha sido colonia de los Estados Unidos por los pasados más de 123 años ya, vamos a ir cumpliendo. Así que lo que significa, nada, muchos retos, 128 años, muchos retos que hemos vivido desde entonces. No es hasta, tuvimos gobiernos militares, tuvimos alguna legislación que nos fue dando algunos poderes, pero no es hasta el 48 que podemos elegir a través de un proceso de elecciones a nuestro propio gobierno, sin embargo, pues con muchísimas también limitaciones en muchos aspectos que podemos hablar. Entre ellas, en el 52 pudimos también aprobar nuestra propia constitución.
Just a second. I want to make sure the translation is working for folks. I just moved mine to English and I'm not hearing the translation. I don't know if others are. Okay. Okay. Go ahead, Ava. Thank you. So people listening should
do you want to start again or?
Yeah, let's have you start again.
Okay.
And people listening, if you go to the More feature and click on translation, you'll get a choice if you want English or Spanish. If you click on English, when a translation is needed, you should hear that automatically. Sorry, go ahead, Ava.
Okay. Well, nada, Eva Prados de Puerto Rico. Actualmente trabajo con la Comisión Ciudadana para la Auditoría de la Deuda Pública. También coordino un partido que se llama Movimiento Victoria Ciudadana, que entre muchos asuntos luchamos por la descolonización de Puerto Rico. Básicamente Puerto Rico lleva más de 128 años como colonia de los Estados Unidos. Veníamos de botín de guerra de España, donde también fuimos una colonia por unos cuantos cientos de años, y como Cuba y las Filipinas, pues nos transfirieron como botín de guerra a Estados Unidos. Y desde entonces tuvimos gobierno militar, luego nos dieron algunos derechos para podernos gobernar, como en el 1948 desde 1948 podemos elegir a nuestro propio gobierno. Luego en el 52 pudimos aprobar nuestra propia constitución, no sin antes el Congreso también poner limitaciones en esa constitución, imponer algunos aspectos también de ella que podemos hablar más adelante. Y a base de que pudimos ya votar por nuestro propio gobierno y de crear nuestra constitución con muchas limitaciones, Estados Unidos decide pedirle a las Naciones Unidas que nos sacara del listado de colonias, y Puerto Rico, como quiera, se ha mantenido muchísimos grupos, distintos grupos de derechos humanos, organizaciones políticas se han mantenido en las Naciones Unidas exigiendo la descolonización de Puerto Rico a pesar de eso, y que nos saque de esa lista de no colonias y de países soberanos, porque no lo somos. Así que la realidad es que estamos enfrentando ahora una nueva realidad política con la imposición de una Junta de Control Fiscal, que estaremos hablando próximamente. Me encantaría escuchar, ¿verdad?, de los procesos.
And Ava, sorry, we're going to get into the details of the history a bit more shortly. So just kind of sticking with introductions more now, if that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Wonderful. Now moving to the Pacific, we have Dr. Robert Underwood, former congressman and longtime mentor. Robert, go ahead.
Buenos dias, Hafade, todos hamzo. It's a pleasure and honor to be part of this panel. My name is Robert Underwood, and I've done many things professionally in my life, but most importantly, from the very beginning of my adulthood, I've been working primarily on the issues related to the security, advancement, political rights, and cultural revival of the Chamorro people. And so in that context, I've done a number of different things, but I'm actually looking forward to doing more things and following the lead of people who come generations afterwards. Politically, the issue for a lot of times, and it's an historical issue. Of course, Guam is linked to Puerto Rico as being part of the spoils of war won from the Spanish-American War. It's always kind of attuned to what's going on in Puerto Rico. And of course, the size and scope of the Puerto Rican experience is so large, looms so large in the consciousness of the United States that it tends to drown out all the experiences of the other territories, which are sometimes seen as kind of quaint relics of a distant past. And that's also a bit of an issue. But historically and politically, the ties between Guam and the Virgin Islands are constantly paired. And so when you look into the history of both entities as governments, you'll see that they are constantly linked, whether it's in the development of elective governorship, the development of the non-voting delegate, the development of the tax system, all of those things that are constantly paired. And so it's kind of like, it's very interesting to me how many advocates from both the Guam and the Virgin Islands sort of not take a look at that, and I think they should. So thank you.
Thanks. Charles, go ahead.
I'm Charles Lima. I was born in American Samoa, raised in my youth in independent Samoa when it became independent, and also in Hawaii. Then I returned to American Samoa after I graduated law school, became a prosecuting attorney, then became a judge in the territorial courts, and then went into private practice and have been practicing for the last 45 years in the territory of American Samoa primarily, but also in the courts of independent Samoa for a few years. I am basically semi-retired now and interested in developing things so that we could educate the Samoan community, both in Samoa and in the States, as to their history and as to their part in the American experience. The thing I am primarily interested in is developing political structures within the territory that reflect the Samoan customs and traditions, while also respecting the basic principles of representative government. One thing I would be very interested in is to see whether or not there is something besides the American three-part system that they have for governance, which seems to be the pattern for even now the territorial governments. And maybe Greenland with its parliamentary system might be an extremely interesting idea.
Thanks, Charlie. Sheila, go ahead.
Hapade, Tito. So happy to be here. My name is Sheila Jack Babauta. I am from the island of Saipan in the Northern Mariana Islands. I'm indigenous to these lands and oceans. I'm a former and recovering politician here in our local legislature. I chair Friends of the Mariana Trench. We are a grassroots nonprofit organization. We bridge spaces with ocean conservation and have worked very closely with federal agencies on what consultation means, what conservation means, and what that looks like for us here on the ground. So that was really my first interaction with the US federal government and very closely. I also serve as the Environment and Democracy Fellow with Right to Democracy here in the NMI and the Pacific Solidarity Director. One thing that I do want to share that I've learned over the years working with Right to Democracy is that here in the NMI, we've always stated that our relationship is unique with the United States because we have a negotiated document called the Covenant. And after working with Right to Democracy, many of the other territories also feel that their relationship is unique. And so I have found and realized that we're all constantly trying to clarify this relationship that we have with the United States. Happy to be here.
Great. Thanks so much. So just to kind of kick off this conversation and do some table setting, when President Trump first took office in his inauguration, he spoke during the inaugural address about, he declared that, quote, the United States will once again consider itself a growing nation, one that expands our territory and carries our flag into new and beautiful horizons, complimenting William McKinley, who was president when the United States extended sovereignty over Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. And then 1 year to the date, he began focusing on the acquisition of Greenland. And let me see if I have this photo of this meme that I might be able to share. Just a minute. Maybe I'll skip that. But he shared a meme of himself holding a flag next to a sign that said Greenland, U.S. territory established 2026 with J.D. Vance and the Secretary of State Rubio next to him, showing that this was not just some idle speculation. This wasn't a joke. This was serious. And we recently posted an article, Addie and I, on Just Security, explaining all of this a bit more in some detail. I'd encourage folks to check that out. But wanted to, before we dug into understanding the relationship in each of the 5 territories, just give a very high-level overview of Greenland's relationship with Denmark. So with respect to political rights, the people of Greenland have their own local government that they elect. They also have representation in the Danish parliament, which decides who the next prime minister will be. They're actually part of a critical kind of swing coalition, so that their votes almost tip the balance on who will be the prime minister of Denmark or not. At the same time of having that political representation in Denmark, they also have an express right to self-determination, including the ability to have a referendum on independence at any time that they should choose to. They have much greater autonomy over local decision-making and the ability to choose what spheres of autonomy they would like to have full control over and self-government. One of those areas that they've exercised that autonomy is to say that they want to have control over mineral resources and mineral extraction. So they have the full decision-making power in that space, and all revenues from mineral extraction goes to Greenland, not to Denmark. At the same time, Denmark provides about $10,000 per resident in support for their local government, while residents of Greenland do not pay any taxes with respect to Denmark. So it's a very different relationship than the one that the U.S. territories have with the United States. And let's go ahead and jump into that conversation. So we'll have a chance to dig in deeper, but would just like each of you to briefly talk about how your territory became to be part of the United States. What are the foundational documents that govern the relationship between your territory and the United States, and any participation the people of your community may have had or not had in doing that? And then finally, what is the UN recognized relationship with respect to your territory? So let's start with the Virgin Islands, which kind of has the closest historical parallels to Greenland, having once been kind of a colony of Denmark, and then transitioning into U.S. rule. Hadia, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll actually, start by saying that one of the interesting things about now Virgin Islands colonial history is that we were occupied, and our big island, specifically St. Croix, was occupied by 7 flags. And Denmark is, of course, our most recent colonizer prior to the United States of America. And so by the early 1900s, the Danish West Indian economy had essentially waned. And under that collapse, Denmark was looking for the opportunity to sell the territory. And the United States of America, of course, positioned itself as having strategic needs in the region. And so several attempts were made at a sale, the first in 1867, a second in 1902. And it's not until 1917 that we see the U.S. purchase what we now call the United States Virgin Islands for $25 million in gold. And I always say that it's important to situate the annexation of the Virgin Islands by the United States in the U.S. imperial history and recognizing that the U.S. was undergoing a wave of U.S. military interventions and occupations in the Caribbean and Central America between 1898 and 1934. And so this effort to extend the Monroe Doctrine by way of the Roosevelt Corollary and really position the United States as having a strategic dominance in the Caribbean and Latin America becomes one of the driving impetuses of the United States to annex the now Virgin Islands. And so we see the US really intervening in Cuba and the Dominican Republic and Haiti around this exact time period where there is a desire to establish a strategic base in the Caribbean region, especially noting the desire to protect the Panama Canal during World War I and to prevent Germany specifically from gaining a foothold in the Caribbean region. And so it's the Treaty of the Danish West Indies that really allows for this annexation. And one of the reasons the Virgin Islands gets invoked in the conversations that we're having around Greenland is because around the time of negotiating and signing the treaty, around August 4th, 1916, Robert Lansing, under Woodrow Wilson, declared on behalf of the United States that the U.S. government will not object to the Danish government extending their political and economic interests to the whole of Greenland. And so the efforts to purchase our territory also coincided with this declaration by the United States that we would not necessarily object to Denmark asserting its authority and its interests over Greenland. During the early period of American rule in the Virgin Islands, we had a naval administration. We also had limited self-government. We were originally governed by the 1936 Organic Act, which created a limited elected legislature, but really retained a lot of federal control over major areas in our local government. And due to a lot of advocacy for civil rights and for increased autonomy by Virgin Islanders, we then achieved the 1954 Revised Organic Act, which is still our governing document for the Virgin Islands today. And so we do not have a constitution. Like many U.S. territories, we exist under the plenary power of Congress. We have had 5 constitutional conventions that did not result in the ratification of a constitution, and our 6th constitutional convention is underway. I'll also say that one of my fellow Environment and Democracy fellows here at Right to Democracy is also a delegate to the Constitutional Convention, Imani Daniel. And so as a territory, we are still grappling with our liminality and like what it means for us to be foreign in a domestic sense and appertenant to, but not a part of the U.S.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Hadia. And yeah, reading the history and language, Robert Lansing, the Secretary of State, around that acquisition, the language is eerily similar to what we're hearing this administration now say about Greenland. Same justification, sea lanes, national security, all these things as an excuse for imperial expansion. Ava, if you want to go ahead, I know you started a bit earlier in explaining some of the history of Puerto Rico. If you want to go ahead and dig into that some more. And again, encourage folks to switch, and if you click on the More button on your screen, if you're just joining us, you can go to Interpretation and select English so that you can hear the translation if it's going to continue in Spanish. Thank you.
Thank you. Solo como expliqué al comienzo, Puerto Rico es un territorio colonia de los Estados Unidos desde ya unos 128 años, específicamente desde 1898, luego de la Guerra Hispanoamericana. Leyes importantes para entender un poco la relación con los Estados Unidos posteriormente, pues tendríamos que mencionar la ley Foraker, que fue la primera que establece un gobierno civil. Al comienzo, los primeros años, fue un gobierno militar. Luego, con la ley Foraker, tuvimos un gobierno civil. Se nos otorgó, ¿verdad? Algunos poderes mínimos en esa estructura de gobierno. Los puestos principales los seguía escogiendo y nombrando el Congreso de los Estados Unidos. Y algunos, pero sí, el poder legislativo contaba con algunos puertorriqueños, pero principalmente el gobierno seguía siendo, el gobernador seguía siendo nombrado por los Estados Unidos. No es hasta luego que se aprueba la ley Jones que se decide otorgar la ciudadanía estadounidense tal cual conocemos a los nacidos en Puerto Rico, y también permitiendo elegir a los puertorriqueños, pues a nuestros cuerpos representativos a nivel de legislatura. Podíamos escoger a los integrantes del Senado, igual que los de las cámaras de representantes. Pero seguía, ¿verdad?, siendo el gobernador y lo que llamamos comisionado residente, que sería nuestra única representación con voz y, pero sin voto, en el Congreso de los Estados Unidos. Tanto el gobernador como ese representante que tenemos en el gobierno, en el Congreso de los Estados Unidos, seguían siendo escogidos por el presidente de los Estados Unidos. No es hasta 1948 que logramos finalmente que se nos permitiera escoger, a través de un proceso democrático, el pueblo de Puerto Rico pudiera escoger a sus representantes, a su gobierno, y no es hasta 1952 que logramos, ¿verdad?, que se aprobara nuestra primera constitución, redactada por y para los puertorriqueños y puertorriqueñas, no sin antes que el Congreso también tuviera poder de veto con algunas partes de esa constitución. Y así lo hizo, vetó algunas partes de nuestra constitución e impuso otros aspectos de dicha constitución. Sin embargo, hoy Puerto Rico no sale como una de las no sale en la lista de las Naciones Unidas como un gobierno que no ha logrado su total autonomía. Estados Unidos logró sacarnos de esa lista, alegando pues que ya nosotros podíamos gobernarnos a nosotros mismos, cuando es muchas las limitaciones todavía que tenemos en nuestro gobierno, que podremos hablar más adelante, como es actualmente la Junta de Control Fiscal. Y así podemos seguir dando ejemplos. Incluso desde Puerto Rico ha habido consenso en ir constantemente todos los años al Comité de las Naciones Unidas por la Descolonización, planteando que Puerto Rico sigue siendo en la práctica una colonia de los Estados Unidos y exigiendo nuestro derecho a la autodeterminación. Así que Puerto Rico sigue enfrentando grandes retos para su autonomía, y definitivamente muy distinto a lo que vive Groenlandia con Dinamarca. Neil,
you're on mute.
Thank you. Thanks, Ava. Shifting to the Pacific, Robert, if you can give us a brief overview of kind of Guam's historical relationship with the United States, that'd be wonderful.
Well, along with Puerto Rico, Guam was acquired through the Treaty of Paris, ending the Spanish-American War, and Guam subsequently was then governed by the naval government of Guam up until and through the Japanese occupation up until 1949. And then Guam was granted an organic act that was formed in the U.S. Congress, and it had It allowed for an elected legislature and some rights, but there was always a great deal of federal oversight over Guam, not only through the influence of the military, but structurally through the appointment of the president and also a court system in which the federal courts actually took care of most cases, initially all felonies and any civil case over $5,000. So over a period of time, that was sort of modified, and eventually Guam, along with the Virgin Islands, got non-voting delegate and an elected governorship. Like the Virgin Islands, again, it was paired in order to resolve the issue of self-determination. I think the great issues in the late 60s and early 70s pertain to the application of non-self-governing territories and the UN resolution 1514, the application of that. And so it generated a lot of interest in the trust territory. And as that was being developed, and the Northern Marianas went in a slightly different direction than the rest of the trust territory. But as that process was ongoing, it was obvious that Guam and the Virgin Islands needed something to hang their hat on. So they passed the creation of the constitutional, the authorization to create a local constitution. That local constitution was attempted once in Guam, and it failed, primarily on the issue of Chamorro self-determination and political status, that you have to have political status first before you devise a constitution to match that political status, and that you had to deal with the issue of Chamorro self-determination. And that, and it was the way we characterized it was putting the carabao before the cart, or the cart before the carabao, actually. And so the Virgin Islands have decided to give it now, I think, as Hidea has mentioned, now they're on their sixth attempt to do this. So it's a kind of a strategic issue. Do you want to create more autonomy for yourself through sort of surreptitiously through this act, or do you want to just say, no, we're not going to do it, and we're going to wait until we can create our own act? So Guam tried the Commonwealth, and that came to a screeching halt in 1997 when it had only the only congressional hearing in Washington, D.C., and I was the delegate from Guam at the time. And even though there's been a lot of interpretation as to how that came about and why it came to a screeching halt, I think it's sort of, I don't know what to give it a percentage rating. I would say at least 50%, maybe as much as 60 or 70%, due to the fact that Puerto Rican political status had not yet been resolved. And until that's resolved, any kind of giving any kind of increased autonomy to Guam via Commonwealth, via an act like that, would have lessons for political parties in Puerto Rico. So the Republicans, I think, basically put an end to the Commonwealth movement of in Guam. And that's where we stand today. And so, always curious to learn more about what we do next, and always kind of like mindful of the fact that territories sort of hang together. And if they don't hang together or they don't coalesce in some fashion, then they'll continue to be picked apart, as has been the case in all 5 instances for the past 100 years. And so that's a really important lesson to learn. In the renewed interest of the United States and Greenland, I wanted to suggest, okay, why don't Denmark give Greenland to the United States, and the United States can give Guam to the Denmark, because then we'd have more autonomy. And I was actually very envious of what goes on in Greenland, and it kind of reflects the fact that almost all responsible nations in the world have a kind of tacit understanding of their role as colonizers. The United States, that lesson in the United States thinking seems to have not been learned, and is now whatever remnants of that lesson that have been learned are now being unlearned under the current administration. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Charlie, why don't you go ahead and share some about American Samoa?
Okay. The interest in American Samoa from the United States perspective initially started commercially. The businessmen out of San Francisco after the Civil War were interested in a coaling station, because now we're getting to steamships and they needed a coaling station in the Middle Pacific. So they made their deals with the local chief of that harbor, Maunga. At the same time, the British and the Germans were getting interested in the bigger islands for their colonial plantings and colonial business. In 1889, they almost went to war over it, but they decided not to go to war over it, and they created the Treaty of Berlin, in which they tried to set up a system similar to the Kingdom of Hawaii. That, however, did not fit with the Samoan system, which does not recognize things such as kingships. So that evolved into a civil war. And also the Germans, Americans, and British were going to go through their war. We're going to start on their World War I. So they decided in 1899 to divide up the sovereignty of this territory and allowed the Germans to go treat for the bigger islands and allowed America to come into the American Samoa to treat with the local chiefs and to try to get access to American Samoa and the harbor. By that time, the U.S. Navy was very much interested in expanding out into the Pacific. So they needed that harbor for their own Navy base. So in 1900 and 1904, the Navy commandant came in and basically made deeds based upon that 1899 agreement, deeds with the various chiefs of American Samoa to be able to, or what became American Samoa, to be able to get control of the islands. And basically this was a deed of sovereignty to the United States. In essence, what had happened was that the United States chopped off the top, the senior chiefs who had traditional control over all the islands, and placed the United States at that head, but maintained the lesser chiefs under the authority of the governor. And the deeds of cession were absolutely clear. We're deeding sovereignty, and we're deeding and everybody recognizes that while we'll respect your customs and traditions, our laws are supreme. U.S. laws are supreme. The Navy then managed the islands under that administrative authority under the Secretary of the Navy until 1951, at which time it was transferred to the Department of Interior. The Department of Interior then did the administration up until the early 1960s, when the decolonial process was in full swing. Western Samoa became independent. The United States, to ensure that they were asked, the American Samoans were asked whether they wanted to become part of the new independent state. They said, absolutely not. We want to remain that way. So the United States, basically to try to show that they were in the process of decolonizing, the Secretary of Interior made a constitution of for the American Samoa government, while not giving up his plenary authority, basically said, this is a constitution that you will have to run your government. Initially, the governors were all appointed by the Secretary of Interior, as were the judges, but the legislature had some power, but ultimately the power rested with the Secretary of Interior. The Constitution was amended a number of times, including allowing the election of governors. But again, this was always under the Secretary of Interior exercising the Secretary's plenary authority delegated from the President, who had been delegated by Congress. In 1984, the Secretary's plenary authority with respect to the constitutional government was removed from the Secretary, and basically then from 1984, any changes to the constitutional government was supposed to then go to Congress. This, however, in 2024, after a constitutional convention made some modifications to the Constitution, I don't think our delegate wanted to go bother Congress about it, maybe not wanting to bring the issues up that Neil and I had been raising. So she got the Secretary of Interior to support a change in which they repealed the 1984 Congressional Act, and basically then scurried back under the Secretary of Interior's plenary authority. So at this point in time, we are under the Secretary's plenary authority, but that the Secretary has approved this Constitution, which was, voted on by the American Samoa people, but it is really then the Secretary has the ultimate authority on all matters relating to governance of the islands.
And this is to the extreme. I just learned on a panel yesterday that so the judges on the High Court in American Samoa, they're employees of the Secretary of Interior. They're hired by the Secretary of Interior through USA Jobs. So you can go apply on the website. And Interior's been dragging their feet and making these hirings. And so the court, my understanding is they lack the sufficient number of judges as a result of that. But just the idea that, the highest level judge in a territory would simply be an employee of a federal agency is a bit mind-boggling. But lots of strange stuff. Sheila, you probably have more strange stuff to talk about with respect to the Northern Mariana Islands. You want to go ahead and run us quickly through your history?
Yes, for sure. So here in the Northern Mariana Islands, we are made up of 14 islands, with Guam being our big sister island. And so for me, it's really important to emphasize that we are part of the same island chain with Guam. We have the same language, same food, culture, but a slightly different history. And so we've been colonized for over 500 years. First, when the Spanish arrived in the 1500s, we were colonized under the Spanish for almost 400 years, and then sold to the Germans. And after World War I, after being a part of the German administration for about 15 years, we became part of the Japanese administration after World War I for almost 26 years. And then World War II, we were liberated, quote unquote, from the Japanese and became part of the Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands for about 30 years. So even just thinking about, like all of us, right, in the territories, how we are transferred and sold and acquired, it's so distant. It really embeds and plants this seed of feeling like an object, like a territory. And so we were part of the Trust Territory for about 30 years with other Micronesian nations like Palau, Marshall Islands, and the Federated States of Micronesia. And then the Northern Mariana Islands sought political union with the United States and went in a different direction. The rest of the other nations in Micronesia had a close relationship with the United States through the Compact of Free Association. But we in the Northern Marianas, we wanted a closer relationship, and we negotiated our founding document, the Covenant. This year, we're actually celebrating or commemorating the 50th year of our covenant. This is a beloved document in our community because it was negotiated And so this process of negotiation really, it really, in our community, in our leaders' eyes, in our people's eyes, it means that we were practicing self-determination. It means that we were entering into this agreement knowingly and with some level of autonomy, right? Because we negotiated the process. The negotiations took about 27 months, and we negotiated things like immigration, land rights. So here in the Northern Mariana Islands, you have to be of Northern Marianas descent to own land. The land leases for defense purposes with the United States were negotiated. Consultation avenues like our 902 talks gives us an avenue to have consultation with the United States government through delegations appointed by the US president. And so, so we have our covenant, and our covenant allowed us to pass and draft our own CNMI constitution. So we do have a constitution in place. We do have our covenant in place. And that's why we feel very special and unique. However, in the recent years, and you can just look at our history of asserting our rights with the federal government and how unilateral actions have taken place from immigration. So our immigration rights were taken away in 2009. The minimum wage laws in 2007 were imposed upon us. We have cockfighting that was banned here, as well as other territories in 2018, and that was a big industry here. And now we have the deep sea mining issue at our front doors. And all of these issues, as well as others, fighting for our submerged lands, it impacts our economy. It impacts our way of life, access to culture, our quality of life. And so we have experienced a brain drain. Many have moved off island. It's become really expensive to live here. And now with deep sea mining at our shores, promising income and revenue from the sky, it has become a topic that has been controversial, and I'm sure we're going to dive deeper into it, how we in the Pacific are addressing the topic of deep sea mining. I'm very grateful for our work with Right to Democracy, since we've been able to follow the issue of deep sea mining since last year when the RFI, the request for information, was issued for American Samoa. And we'll dive deeper into how this unique relationship, our founding documents, how they protect us, or how we believe they should be protecting us. And the reality is different.
Yeah, Sheila, let's just jump into that. I mean, if you can share, you've been really involved in a lot of the kind of community education and engagement around this deep sea mining issue. Just share for folks a little bit of maybe more detail on how this came about from the federal government, the reaction the community has had, and if you could kind of talk about that a little bit more, and then what kind of has that caused in terms of reflection in the local community of understanding the nature of the relationship with the United States, maybe shifting some of the understandings around that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Neil. Because of my work with Right to Democracy, we were able to follow the issue when it was introduced in American Samoa. And because of my work with Friends of the Mariana Trench, we in the Marianas, we steward these oceans where the Mariana Trench is located, the deepest point in our world's ocean. It's such a special and sacred place to us. It is largely undiscovered. We know more about the moon than we know about the Mariana Trench. And so the deep sea is very close to home for us. It is not something that feels distant. And when deep sea mining came up so rapidly during this administration, it did cause a lot of anxiety, some fear. Some people were even like falling into the trap of being excited over a new industry that may lift us out of poverty. But because of our large network with Friends of the Mariana Trench, we were able to activate really quickly. Because of the network with Right to Democracy, we were already engaging our leaders, I was attending public meetings and hearings, asking our elected officials if they have heard of deep sea mining being introduced here in the Marianas, because we already knew what was happening in American Samoa. And last November 11th, it was announced the request for information was released by BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, under the Department of the Interior, to open the request for comments around deep sea mining in the Marianas. And at the same time, they announced the expansion of the area of interest for American Samoa. So American Samoa is just like a few steps ahead in the process of deep sea mining than we are. And so we've been watching closely on how the community's been responding and how the federal government has been responding. And with American Samoa, they were so clear to stand in unity in opposition to deep sea mining. All of their elected officials, governor, lieutenant governor, the Senate, the House, their delegate, were opposed to deep sea mining. They made that clear. They stated the language and submitted their letters. More than 76,000 public comments were submitted in the time frame to submit public comments, which is huge. That is huge for a territory of about 50,000 people, right? And so, so when our request for information was issued, we knew that we had to activate quickly as well, because the federal government responded to American Samoa's opposition in a way that was so disrespectful in our eyes, and just discarded the community's response, disregarded the elected officials' response, and continued with the process. And so for us here in the NMI, we had to activate.
Even worse, they nearly doubled the size of the zone being considered.
Right.
So in the face of opposition, the United States response was, well, let's make it twice as big.
Right, exactly. And so here in the NMI, we activated quickly. Our request for information and comment period was over the holidays. And so that made it very difficult and intense to organize the community. Our community was very confused at first. Many were not aware of what deep sea mining was. Many didn't know that there was a comment period open. And so we had a lot of work to do. And there was no support from the Interior or the federal government to host any type of community engagement or have some meaningful consultation, free, prior, and informed consent. And so we have seen that after the closing comment period for American Samoa, about 3 months later, they received notice from BOEM. And so we're kind of expecting the same timeline at around April to see what's going to happen next, since our comment period closed in January, and we submitted over 60,000 signatures, comments. Just the response was also really big. Now, connecting it to our founding documents, our covenant and our CNMI Constitution, we don't exactly have language under submerged lands. It's something that we've been trying to assert our rights over since the beginning, since we became a U.S. territory. But even with my mentors here say that our negotiations didn't spend enough time talking about our submerged lands, our exclusive economic zone, and all of that. So after we became a U.S. territory, it's almost like then we realized that these federal laws that were passed prior to us becoming a territory, they were relevant in our relationship. And so we had to fight along the way to assert our rights over the ocean, that we have been stewarding this place for generations. And now, today, it is understood just widely that the CNMI, we manage 0 to 3 miles out, and then 3 miles to 200 miles are in the US jurisdiction, and then outside of 200 miles is international waters, right? And so because this request for information is within the US jurisdiction, quote unquote, that we have no say. So there are many in our community, even our elected leaders, who say that's outside of our jurisdiction. We can't do anything about it. And many of us who feel deeply rooted here, who love our home so much, refuse to accept that we just hand over our rights and roll over and let the US federal government do whatever they want with the oceans around us that we live so closely to, that we are so connected to. And so we're going to continue, this fight that is not always so fun. I feel like that's just been the nature of our relationship from the beginning with the United States, is always just trying to assert our rights and always fighting. There's always something.
And Sheila, you're doing a great job in the community. It's not easy, and we just really are so proud to be working with you on this, and you've just done a tremendous job. Pivoting over to American Samoa, Charlie, would love to hear a little bit of your reaction of how this deep sea mining issue has maybe opened people's eyes or changed how they think about the nature of the relationship with the United States. And then if you could get into, this issue you and I have been working together on for more than a decade, about how the United States has imposed this status of non-citizen U.S. national on the people of American Samoa, how that status continues today, and the criminal consequences it's having for American Samoans in Alaska, who we're representing in criminal cases that they could face up to 5 to 10 years in jail.
Thanks, Neil. On the deep sea mining issue, as I said before, there was always commercial interest down in people coming down from the States with ideas of commercializing the area in and around American Samoa. So we've had a lot over a century and a half of this kind of idea that somebody's going to come in and try to commercialize. The deep sea mining here is just another step in that direction. A lot of American Samoans, especially the people up in the political class, always were, as Sheila was saying, looking for, this might be good for commercial use. But what we did was, and I credit Right to Democracy and the other territories for supporting this too, there is a very strong contingent of American Samoans who do not want to have this kind of commercial exploitation. So the American Samoans did stand up, and we did shut down through that action the ability of the politicians to basically try to say this is a moneymaker for us. So in that sense, I think it was very good that we had the support of the other territories to be able to show that, hey, you're not standing alone. We're all with you. And that kept the politicians in line so that it isn't just, this is another way to make money for the territory or for us. It is now an environmental issue, and it's supported by the politicians down there. Now, as to awakening people's eyes to the power dynamics, American Samoans have always had this idea that their deed of cessions are somehow protective of their rights within their area, including their oceans. This case kind of, and it's not the past generations. Past generations knew that they should become, that they need more integration into the U.S. and becoming citizens. Current generation has this idea that somehow not being part of the United States or not having constitutional rights that other people in the United States have is protective of them. This deep sea mining issue is telling them, no, this plenary authority that you've given to the Secretary of Interior includes the ability to say, we don't care what you think, you're going to do what we want. And I think that's what's happening now. So I think in a sense, the ability to be able to bring together Samoans and the rest of the territories has been very helpful in terms of at least getting public opinion. Whether or not this is going to impact whatever this administration wants to do, well, that's another point. But at least it gets the idea that they're not, they don't have to listen to us. The federal government doesn't have to listen to what you say. They may have to take your comments, but they don't have to listen to those comments. Now, another aspect that we're dealing with here in Alaska, as Neil mentioned, is that there is a specific status that was created by Congress, which distinguishes between people that are not distinguished, but creates this category of people called U.S. nationals. Everybody is a U.S. national, including U.S. citizens, because they owe their allegiance to the United States. American Samoans are born owing their allegiance to the United States, so they're U.S. nationals. However, Congress passed a law saying that specifically for the territories, you do not become citizens by the fact that you were born on U.S. sovereign soil. You only become citizens because Congress now tells you that you can become citizens. So I can understand why you might want to pass something for people that were that had been sought under another sovereignty, but then got changed when people bought. But now in American Samoa, it's been 125 years. There are no more people who are born under a different sovereignty. They were all born under U.S. sovereignty. But this distinction still remains specifically for American Samoans, that they are U.S. nationals born owing their allegiance to the United States, but not U.S. citizens for the full rights. One of the things that has happened up in Alaska is that there is a great deal of confusion, even with the state governments and with others, because they haven't learned about this special distinction. They think U.S. citizen, that's really the only thing, that U.S. national is coextensive with U.S. citizens. And so what they did was they allowed a number of Samoans, American Samoans, to register to vote, and that they were given the certificate saying they could vote, they could run for office. And what they did then was they found out it was wrong, that this was not correct. They then came in and started prosecuting a family for exercising what is basically a fundamental right that we believe should exist, the right to vote. But they prosecuted them because while they were U.S. nationals born on U.S. sovereign soil, they were not given the right of citizenship. So in essence, what you've created through these statutes is a second class of citizenship, basically, that you don't have all the rights associated with being a U.S. citizen. And these are the things that Neil and I have been fighting for. And now they're prosecuting a family, a Samoan family, for exercising what should be a fundamental right, based upon the fact that they are not citizens, which is also another fundamental right, which should be established by the U.S. Constitution because they were born on U.S. sovereign soil, owing their allegiance to the United States. So these are issues that are created primarily because, of the racism that existed back in 1900 that is still passing on through 125 years later, under the so-called idea that somehow it is being protective of their custom and culture. And I can tell you one thing right now is that there is a lot of abuse of this racist system, not only by Americans, but also by, people in Samoa, that certain fundamental rights are not being enforced down in American Samoa because of the idea that somehow we're separate. We can pick and choose what parts of the United States Constitution apply to us. So that's my 2 cents on that.
And can you share a little bit about the support the family in Alaska has received from American Samoa's leaders and the community in Alaska?
Yes. The government of American Samoa, our governor and our congressperson and the other Samoans in the political arena are very much supportive of that. Not of the issue of citizenship. They're very much supportive of the issue that this should not be prosecuted as a criminal action and that it should be dealt with administratively. The argument, however, underlying everything here is the reason why they're in this trouble is because they have not been recognized as citizens, and that they're just trying to cover it over by saying, yes, we support you, but we don't think, we support you, don't charge them criminally in doing that. But then they don't address the underlying issue that has created that problem. And that's the issue that I think that we need to
and what's been very
continue to focus on.
In Alaska, they continue to prosecute this family very aggressively, despite these calls from the local community in Alaska, in American Samoa, to the point where one of the women being prosecuted is an elderly woman who has been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, literally has weeks to live. And even then, the state of Alaska will not drop the charges against her and is seeking to put her children and, in some cases, I think maybe even grandchildren in jail. So it's a really unfortunate situation, that again derives from this imposition of this secondary status on the people of American Samoa. Robert, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Charles for this excellent explanation of the conditions and the situations, and also for Sheila. And just going back briefly to the issue of deep seabed mining. There's of course there are a lot of environmental concerns pertaining to it, but at the bottom of deep seabed mining, to mix metaphors, even deeper than deep seabed mining is the issue of ownership, is the issue of sovereignty over those resources. And it just strikes me as this is the first issue in which American Samoa and the Commonwealth and Guam are all on the same sheet.
Mm-hmm.
So all 3 communities are on the same sheet, and elected officials all seem to be on the same sheet. So and of course, I'm just hopeful that there's a National Governors Association meeting coming up later on this month, that there may be an opportunity for an IGIA meeting also in DC later on this month. This is an opportunity for the officials of these 3 territories. Also, just kind of like putting on my historian hat here for a little bit, is that all 3 territories, I don't know, to some extent, I'm not sure about Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, but all 3 Pacific territories, a lot of people are suffering a kind of like historical delusion about their relationship with the United States. The deed of cession was always told me, that insulates us from so many things, and it makes us separate, makes us very unique and different from the other territories. And I've heard that from a number of Samoan officials over the course of my political life. And I also heard the same thing about the covenant, that somehow the covenant has insulated and made the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas very, very different and unique. And then in Guam, people believe that the granting of U.S. citizenship somehow insulated them from all the abuses that they are now experiencing, even as members of the entity of the territory of Guam. We're all kind of suffering under an historical delusion. And so that historical delusion can only be unpacked if we kind of focus on how all our delusions sort of coalesce and come together so that we understand it, because other than that, many of us will continue to advocate and articulate from our own particular history instead of understanding that these historical delusions really empower federal officials. And Charles, I'm so grateful. I'm renewed in my scandalized view of how the Secretary of Interior continues to hold sway. I mean, it's just so absurd, yet it continues. I just wanted to thank
No,
Charles.
thanks, Robert. And we've got just over 15 minutes left. I want to hear some more from Ava and Hadia. But Robert, if you can quickly just kind of explain a little bit about the military situation in Guam and the Marianas, if you can just touch on that in a couple of minutes.
Okay, sure. Obviously, the United States is investing billions of dollars to create what they call an integrated air missile defense system for Guam, a kind of a dome, a missile dome. And they are anticipating that will cost $6 to $8 billion. They've invested $6 billion in the development of Camp Blas to move the Marines from Okinawa to Guam. And at the end of this expenditure today, there's 150 Marines there. So now we have a big vacant Camp Blas with the Marines don't want to come to Guam. And I've been saying that for decades. The Marines don't think that they should be in Guam. They want to be close to where the action is. But in anticipation of the fact that if the Chinese were really to attack Guam over a conflict over Taiwan, the U.S. forces would be unable to defend Guam and hit back. So they have to build other bases. So that's why they're going to Tinian in the Northern Marianas. That's why they're going to Palau. That's why they're going to Yap. So all of this is predicated on a kind of a second island chain defense arc that the military is investing billions and billions of dollars on. And and now, of course, some of it is upended by the erratic nature of the Trump administration. First, we're important. Now it seems Latin America is more important. Now it seems like the Caribbean is more important. They use Puerto Rico and in order to attack Venezuela, and then now, of course, Greenland is even more important. So in that kind of erratic nature, but the reality remains that billions of dollars are being invested here, and even in just to make this final point, because the security of the people of Guam is really, of course, paramount in my mind. In Taiwan, in Okinawa, they are building bomb shelters in case of a conflict. In Guam, billions of dollars are being spent. And then if you ask the federal government, are you building bomb shelters? Oh, no, that's not our job, or that's Homeland Security, or that's somebody else's job. And so we're here being basically left as vulnerable, as being the kind of the catch-all for a potential conflict with China. And, so now they're telling us that we will defend you because you're part of, quote, the U.S. homeland, unquote. And I'm thinking, well, really?
We've seen that movie before.
Yeah, we've heard that story before. But that's the quick update. Thank you for that.
And Ava, I know Puerto Rico has its own history with the military. I think many folks had hoped that was, in the past. Now we see again, it's in the present. If you want to react a little bit on that and then dig into a little bit more discussion around PROMESA and these issues of really the federal government through the oversight board really controlling every aspect of Puerto Rico's government and democratic processes. And again, folks, if you are not set to the translation in English, go ahead and follow the instructions that we posted to do that. Go ahead, Ava.
Bueno, agradecida porque definitivamente escucharlos me hace ver todas las similitudes que viven los otros territorios, además de lo que vivimos en Puerto Rico. Desde ahorita les mencioné que si bien en el 1952 pudimos
Sorry,
aprobar.
Eva, I think we may be having an issue with the translation. Are others able to hear it?
If you want, I can continue in English. This is
Okay.
better for you. I can do it.
Okay, that could be fine.
Just as I told you before, even if Puerto Rico in 1952 we could approve our own constitution, and in 1948 we could vote for our elected official, and that's put in place this concept of Puerto Rico Commonwealth. The reality is that this idea, or this, even if it's an official name for us, has been an important issue in Puerto Rico. Actually, we have our last three principal parties has been created because this controversy about our relationship with United States. One party promote the relationship as it is, as this Commonwealth. The other one, that is the statehood party, promote the statehood, and the other party promote the independence for Puerto Rico. So this concept of what means really the Commonwealth relationship or the Commonwealth status has been a really contested issue in Puerto Rico. So when I heard about how it has been in Puerto Rico, is a really complicated, because most of the people, as I have heard, believe, or some, I think that half of Puerto Rican believe that our relationship with the United States is unique, is different, but what has happened to Puerto Rico the last 10 years with the Puerto Rico Financial Management and Oversight Board put a big question about how really means the Commonwealth for Puerto Ricans. I will talk about the military issue, but I think we'll start with the financial
That's fine.
situation of Puerto Rico. First of all, we are in an economic distress situation, but it's not only because we have a bad administration, elected official. I think that we have a really huge problem of economic development that is very related to the difference limitation that we have in our relationship with the United States. We do not control our frontiers. We do not decide about a lot of different aspects of our economy. So it had been very difficult to implement an economic development plan that could help to Puerto Rico have a healthy economy. So we have been using public debt, to our most of our government activities, and that's create a huge and unsustainable public debt that take us to a bankruptcy process. At the beginning, we try to restructure our public debt as by our own courts, because we have our local court system, and we try to restructure our public debt among our own courts, but that was stopped by the U.S. government. The Supreme Court of the United States declared unconstitutional our intent to restructure our own debt. So we have to wait for the Congress of the United States to decide what we do with the territory in bankruptcy. And at the beginning, we have not allowed to be part of, or to apply the bankruptcy code to Puerto Rico. And in 2016, the Congress approved PROMESA. That is the PROMESA, is the Puerto Rico Financial Management, and created the Puerto Rico Financial Management and Oversight Board. And it's important to know more about PROMESA, and I have not all the time to explain it, but it's important to know about it because it could be an example of what can happen in other territory that have a problem of their public debt. So what means this board? Well, we call it La Junta, and this oversight board that for us is not an oversight at all, it's a control board that decide, I think that every important governmental decision right now is taken by the board, and the board is a congressional, was congressional created for the US Congress, but also their members are appointed by the president with the consent of the Congress. And for that is that the people of Puerto Rico do not decide about who are part of the board. And that is a really big issue because right now the board, as I said, has had the power to not only control our budget, not only they also are the one that represent us in the bankruptcy process. They make every proposal on every plan of debt adjustment and with the court, and they also negotiate with the bondholders for us. And the problem is that most of this bankruptcy process have a huge impact in the Puerto Rico future, and most of the decision that the board has put in place regarding the bankruptcy had not been for us for the better of the people of Puerto Rico. But right now, the board not only have the power to represent us in the bankruptcy process, but it also decide about some basic things, as if the legislature approves legislation that for the board they do not agree with the legislation, because even if it could be legislation that have no impact in our fiscal decision, if the board say no, they can void the legislation. So they decide about our budget, they decide of what law can be approved and what law can't be approved, and they have huge power over so many daily decision of our public agency. Right now is really huge, the power that have had the board over our government. But the last year, the president of the US president right now, Donald Trump, fire a majority of the board. And you can say, well, maybe it's the end of the board. And it's not. The board still working. The reason why the Trump unilaterally firing majority of the member, he said, at least that was because the board was too expensive. But the reality is that behind the thing, there are a very powerful bondholders that are pushing different board membership, because the board have not agreed with the kind of debt payment that they want. They want the board promote a bigger payment. They want more money to pay back for their debt. And in an issue that is very important for Puerto Rico, that is because the only part of the public debt that is pending for restructuring is the energy sector public debt. And with energy, that means that bondholders not only wants to biggest payment, but they want to rate the energy rate, to increase the energy rate for their payment, and that has a huge impact in our economy. So that had been a very contested issue too. How and when, for how long will the board? We're still waiting for the resolution of this situation about the energy sector public debt. And that is, I think, that the reason why the Donald Trump, because this bondholder promote make pressure to get a better board that understand what they want. So
it's absolutely wild, just the layers of colonialism and undemocratic rule that exist there. Any kind of final reactions? I want to give some time to Hadia to talk about the Constitutional Convention too, as we wrap up. Well, thank you, Ava. That's wonderful, and we can and should and probably will have a whole panel just focus on PROMESA. It is the 10-year anniversary. No one's celebrating that. Everyone would like to see it go, but how that happens, there's a lot of conversation to still happen. Hadia, if you can kind of walk us through to kind of close things out, some of the dynamics around the Constitutional Convention going on today. Again, as everyone said, it's the sixth one. And any other reactions to comments that other folks have made that you feel connected to in the Virgin Islands?
Yeah, I'll actually just start by saying that I'm really grateful for each of you. I feel like I learned so much about each of our experiences with American colonialism and its impacts. And to Dr. Underwood's point about the importance of understanding how our delusions coalesce and come together, I find that in the Virgin Islands, we talk a lot about, scholars and artists in the Virgin Islands talk a lot about the colonial amnesia and the ways in which the United States of America isn't often framed or understood as being a colonial power in the conventional sense, but continues to have colonies across the world. And I actually think this is also really important for Greenland because in many ways, Denmark shares a political imagination of not technically imagining itself to be a colonial power vis-a-vis other European colonial powers. And so one thing that also is important to think about as we talk about constitutional development is to Dr. Underwood's point about Guam and the BI sharing key pivotal moments in federal statutes. It's a 1976 federal act that was authorized by Congress for the Virgin Islands and Guam to draft each of our own constitutions and have local self-government. And what it really allowed for was for the territories to convene a constitutional convention, but there were certain stipulations that were put in place, right? And specifically that the Constitution would operate under U.S. sovereignty, that it would include a Bill of Rights, it would remain consistent to some extent with the Organic Act, and that it would have to be formally submitted by the governor, reviewed by the president, then submitted to Congress, which retained the authority to ratify, amend, or reject any proposed constitution. And only then would it return to the people of the Virgin Islands and Guam to vote on it. And so we get this legal pathway for constitutional development. And the Virgin Islands, we have had 5 attempts prior to this 6th Constitutional Convention, first in the mid-60s, then in the early 70s, then in the late 70s, going into the early 80s, and then again in the late 2000s, before beginning again in 2024. But there are some key issues that emerged in the 5th Constitutional Convention that I think are always important for all of us to grapple with. And one, of course, when the Department of Justice issued their notes on the 5th Constitutional Convention's proposed constitution, they stated that one, the draft didn't explicitly recognize U.S. sovereignty and the supremacy of federal law over the territory. They also said that the provisions to grant certain protections and rights to ancestral and native ancestral Virgin Islanders violated the Equal Protection Clause of the U.S. Constitution. They claimed that the draft imposed certain residency requirements for governors and judges that they deemed to be unconstitutional, and that also there were just certain provisions around marine resources that also appeared to be inconsistent with federal law and Congress's plenary power over the territory. And in many ways, we, of course, have the authority to draft a constitution, but it becomes abundantly clear that that constitution cannot conflict with federal law, must preserve U.S. sovereignty, does not change political status in and of itself. And so it really forces us to grapple with our colonial relationship with the United States of America and address like fundamental questions about who we want to be as a people. And there are two things I like to say when I talk about constitutional development in the Virgin Islands. The first one is that as an anecdote, if the United States of America was required to have the UK approve of a constitution that was being created, I think we can all ask ourselves the question, do we think it would have been successful, or would there have been multiple attempts to get it passed? And then the second is there's actually a writer from Barbados. His name was George Lamming, and he had a novel called Season of Adventure. And two of the characters in the novel have this conversation, Krim and Powell. And Powell says to Krim, if I ever give you freedom, Krim, then all your future is mine, because whatever you do in freedom name is what I make happen. And seeing that way is a blindness from the start. And I really love that dialogue between Krim and Powell, because in many ways our constitutional development process and the constraints under federal law reflect in many ways a freedom pathway that requires the authority, but also to some extent the approval of the colonial authority. And so I find that there are lessons that we can learn from our 5 failed, quote unquote, attempts, even though I don't necessarily like to call them failures. One being the question of identity, both cultural and political. Who gets to define who we are as a people? How do we understand conflicts around identity and rights and protections or privileges being extended to people who are ancestral Virgin Islanders or native Virgin Islanders? What does it mean to have a constitution denied on the basis of it violating equal protection clause, while recognizing that as colonial subjects in U.S. territories, our rights are not necessarily embedded in the Constitution, but they are determined through like the plenary power of Congress. And so how do we grapple with congressional oversight over our process? But then also the other question being about internal disagreements, because when we look at the 5 constitutional conventions, some of those debates around identity and native and ancestral native rights are also internal debates within the territory. They reflect tensions and even xenophobia between Virgin Islanders with deep roots in the territory and Virgin Islanders who migrated to the Virgin Islands from the wider Caribbean. However, one of the questions I often have is, aren't these debates that we should be able to address and to process and to resolve internally with our own forms of truth and reconciliation processes, rather than having Congress and the federal government have the ultimate authority to ratify, amend, or reject our proposed constitution. And with the 6th Constitutional Convention, we know that this is a really big moment in our history. The legislation that enabled this 6th convention was put forward by former Senators Janelle Sarow and Genevieve Whitaker. And as I mentioned earlier, one of our Environment and Democracy Fellows is also a delegate, Imani Daniel. And so they are currently in the process of developing the Constitution for the people of the Virgin Islands. In the original enabling acts, they were supposed to have the draft by October 31st, 2025. However, they asked for an extension through 2027 to really have an opportunity to have a comprehensive, community-informed process with wider public engagement. There are also attempts to secure funding to ensure that that process really allows for the most comprehensive level of engagement, both by the delegates, but also by the people of the territory more broadly. And I'll just say that in many ways, I think our constitutional development process really sits at the heart of our tensions around coloniality and also territorial status.
That's wonderful, Hadia. So we're a bit over time, so we'll just wrap up. What I'd ask each of you is, taking all of this in, what is maybe, if you had a message to send to the people of Greenland based upon your relationship with the United States, in a word or a very short sentence, what would that message be? And whoever's ready to go can go. It's kind of quick fire round.
My first question would be, do you really want to be subject to the plenary authority of Congress?
It's a good one. Ava.
Well, I think that most of the time we feel powerless when the federal government impose all these things. So it's terrible. Feel powerless and right now with the military present in Puerto Rico, that get worse.
Sheila.
Yeah, I'd say the experience of imperialism is real for us. Get ready to fight and fight and fight.
India or Robert?
I'd say that self-determination, I would argue, is always more important than quote unquote military strategic interests. And so much of the debate tends to be about the colonial powers, and we should shift that focus back to ourselves.
Wonderful. Robert, if you're still there. Well, I thank you all for joining us today.
Yeah,
go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, just briefly on plenary power. There's always the theory that plenary power can be used for good, but and there's always somebody out there arguing that maximum authority by Congress means that they can avoid the Constitution in the cases of the territories. I've yet to see it happen, but just so that people are aware that seemingly is out there somewhere.
Well, thanks all of you. Thanks everyone who joined and participated in this. We will be posting the video online to our website and our YouTube channels, where you can also find lots of other great content. So thank you, everyone. This was wonderful, and the conversation will continue. Take care. Have a good evening and morning.
Take care. This is
Thank you, Neil. See you later. Bye, everybody.